Hello and welcome to London Tales, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Tonight, I shall recount one of the most chilling cases ever encountered in the long annals of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, an affair which began in the familiar fog of Baker Street and ended with poisoned wine beneath the velvet curtains of the Berlin Grand Theatre. Chapter 1. A Distressed Visitor at Baker Street. Hello and welcome to London Tales, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Tonight, I shall recount an episode that began on a cold December evening, with fog so thick upon Baker Street that one could scarcely see the lamp across the way. It was in that twilight murk, with the gas jets hissing and the fire snapping in our grate, that Sherlock Holmes and I were visited by a gentleman whose tale would draw us from the comfort of our hearth to the shadowed corridors of the Berlin Grand Theatre. It was an evening such as only London can contrive, the streets muffled beneath damp mist, the air chill enough to turn one's breath into ghostly vapor, and the distant clatter of a hansom cab echoing like a lonely note in a symphony of fog. I had settled myself in my accustomed armchair at 221B Baker Street, a glass of port at hand, and my medical journals spread before me, when Holmes uttered one of those restless sighs which always announced his discontent with the ordinary. He lay, long and lean upon the settee, his pipe sending up fragrant curls of smoke. His keen gray eyes stared into the coals as though to conjure a puzzle where none existed. I had seen that look many times before, the look of a mind hungering for engagement, a hawk poised yet chained. "Watson," he said abruptly, "there are evenings when London herself conspires to suffocate a man of intellect. Observe this fog, thicker than soup, blotting out every stimulus to thought. No case to sharpen the faculties, no criminal to pursue, only the dreary march of hours." I laughed. "Surely even your mind requires rest, Holmes. You cannot be forever engaged in the chase, the human frame. The human frame, far and recently, and not without haste." The stranger started. "How could you know?" Holmes smiled faintly. "The state of your boots speaks of long railway platforms. The sleeve of your coat is dusted with chalk of a continental variety. And your accent, though subdued, places you in the Rhineland. But more of that anon. Pray, take a seat. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. John Watson." The gentleman bowed slightly in my direction, then sank into the chair opposite Holmes. For a moment he pressed his handkerchief to his brow as though to steady himself. "My name," he said at last, his voice low and tremulous, "is Wilhelm Krauss. I am the impresario of the Grand Theatre in Berlin." Holmes inclined his head. "Your establishment is well known. Pray proceed." Krauss drew a deep breath. "Mr. Holmes, my theatre has of late become the stage not of art, but of death. 3 men, patrons of wealth and influence, have perished within its walls in the span of a fortnight. Each succumbed in the same manner. During a toast in the grand foyer, their glasses raised in merriment, they collapsed, gasping and convulsed, and within minutes were lifeless. The physicians spoke of heart seizures, but I saw their faces. It was poison, Mr. Holmes. It could be nothing else." As he spoke, his hands trembled so violently that his hat slipped to the floor. Holmes leaned forward, his gaze intent. "You are quite right to seek counsel. Poison is the coward's weapon, the invisible assassin. Tell me, Herr Kraus, were the victims connected in some fashion? Yes, Kraus whispered. All were financiers, men who held great sway over the theater's endowments. Without them, our future is imperiled. But it is not merely ruin of reputation or fortune that I fear. The city whispers already. Each death has drawn greater suspicion upon my house. If another should fall, my theater will be finished. I beg you, Mr. Holmes, come to Berlin. Save us from chamber, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Holmes rose, pacing slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Herr Kraus, he said, there are cases one cannot refuse. Your theater has become a crucible in which art, wealth, and death are mingled. Such a problem is worthy of our fullest attention. Watson, make note. We leave for Berlin by the morning train. I confess I felt a thrill, though tinged with unease. The specter of poison is one that chills even the physician, for it is silent and insidious, striking down the healthy as though by unseen hand. Kraus exhaled as if a great burden had lifted. You will come? Then perhaps all is not lost. Holmes regarded him keenly. Before we depart, permit me a few observations. You are no stranger to the backstage of your theater. You bear upon your right glove the stain of candle wax, upon your sleeve the dust of chalk such as is used to mark stage positions. You do not merely preside as financier. You walk among your actors and crew. Am I right? Kraus stared, astonished. Yes, it is true. I was once a stagehand before fortune raised me higher. Just so. Remember, Herr Kraus, that the murderer walks not among strangers, but among those to whom access is freely given. You say the poison strikes in the toast. Then it is delivered not in solitude but in plain sight. A paradox, and therefore most promising. Leave us your address in Berlin. We shall join you shortly. Kraus scribbled upon a card, his hand unsteady. Then, with a bow, he departed into the fog, his tall frame swallowed by the mist beyond our window. When the door had closed, Holmes resumed his seat, his face alight with the joy of pursuit. Watson, he said, what is your diagnosis of the case? I considered. 3 deaths, each by apparent poisoning, yet no trace in bottle or glass. To my mind, some ingenious device, a tainted cork perhaps, or a contaminant introduced at the moment of pouring. Holmes chuckled softly. Excellent, Watson. Compartment in which he sprawled in his customary fashion, a newspaper in one hand, a bundle of notes in the other, and his keen gaze darting between the two as though to wrestle the world's secrets from their pages. For my own part, I confess to being in high spirits. It had been some months since we had undertaken a case of genuine moment, and though my practice at Paddington gave me steady employment, I could not deny the peculiar exhilaration that attended these journeys in Holmes's company. The man was at his best when presented with a riddle, and the glow of anticipation in his gray eyes filled me with confidence that even the shadow of death at the Berlin theater would not long withstand his analysis. Holmes broke the silence after an hour's travel. You observed Kraus carefully last night, Watson. Indeed I did. A man under the greatest agitation. He appeared worn, almost desperate, as though the burden of guilt had been laid upon him, though he protests his innocence. Holmes tapped the edge of his paper. Just so. He is an impresario, accustomed to grand gestures and the play of emotion. Yet beneath that exterior lies a practical mind, one that has managed the intricate machinery of a great theater. He is no fool. His fear is not of the authorities but of ruin. That is what convinces me that his appeal is genuine. I nodded. And yet, these deaths, could they not be explained by coincidence? Men of finance often lead unhealthy lives. It is not impossible that heart seizures struck each in turn. Holmes smiled thinly. Your reasoning is sound, my dear doctor, yet too charitable for the criminal mind. Coincidence may account for one death, or even two, but three in the same place at the same ceremony? No, Watson, no. Nature seldom repeats herself with such precision. It is human design we must suspect. He folded his paper, revealing a map of Berlin that he had sketched in quick strokes upon the back. Observe here, the location of the Grand Theater, situated upon Unter den Linden, a noble address, frequented by statesmen and men of fortune. These deaths will have repercussions far beyond the boards of a stage. Another whisper ran through the theater this very morning. A baron who had promised to attend the gala tonight has withdrawn, fearing for his life. If the public confidence is not restored, we are lost. Holmes regarded him keenly. Patience, Herr Kraus. We shall examine your theater before a word of reassurance is spoken. Lead the way. We were conveyed by carriage through the bustling streets until we drew up before the Grand Theater itself, a splendid edifice of marble and gilt, its facade adorned with statues of the Muses, its broad steps thronged even in the cold night air with carriages arriving for rehearsal. The lamps threw a golden haze upon the fog, and I confess the sight stirred me with a sense of awe. Inside, however, the atmosphere was far from reassuring. Though the chandeliers blazed and the crimson carpets gleamed, there lingered an undercurrent of dread. Musicians whispered in corners, stagehands moved with exaggerated caution, and more than once I saw a glance cast nervously towards the grand foyer where the toasts had taken place. Kraus conducted us first to his office, a chamber lined with programs and portraits of illustrious singers. There he produced a dossier of statements, each from a servant, musician, or guest who had been present at the fatal toasts. Holmes spread these upon the desk and began to read with the utmost concentration. 3 deaths, he murmured. Herr Schneider, Herr Bauer, and Count Meissner. Each fell within minutes of the toast. Each drank from a different glass poured by a different servant, yet from the same bottle chosen by the toastmaster. And the bottles were examined by the police, with no result. Kraus nodded miserably. They were even sent to the university laboratory. Not a trace of poison was found. Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled. Watson, recall my maxim. That which is impossible, once all else is eliminated, must be the truth. The wine was poisoned, yet no poison was found. Therefore it was either of a substance unknown to chemistry, or else it never touched the wine at all. I started. Never touched of drinking. Remarkable. He rose suddenly. Come, Watson. We must view the foyer itself. Kraus led us through corridors hung with velvet draperies until we emerged into a vast hall of marble pillars and gilded ceiling. The scent of wine lingered faintly, mingled with wax and perfume. It was a noble chamber, designed to impress patrons with the splendor of art. Yet to my imagination, shadowed by Kraus's tale, it seemed haunted by invisible menace. Holmes moved swiftly, his gaze darting from chandeliers to floor tiles, from wine tables to ornamental vases. He knelt beside a cabinet where the bottles were stored, running his long fingers over the corks and labels. He paused, extracting one bottle from the rack. "Observe, Watson. A faint indentation upon the cork, no larger than a pinprick. You perceive it?" I leaned closer and indeed discerned a tiny puncture. "Yes, but surely that could be from a corkscrew." Holmes shook his head. "Not so. A corkscrew tears, it does not pierce with such clean precision. This, my dear fellow, is the mark of an injector. Some instrument capable of introducing liquid through the cork without disturbing its seal. Ingenious. One might inject a minute quantity of poison sufficient to kill, yet invisible once the cork is drawn in the usual fashion." Krauss uttered a groan. "Then it is true. My wine has been tampered with." Holmes replaced the bottle gently. "Not your wine, Herr Krauss. Only certain bottles, chosen with foreknowledge of the toast. Consider the skill required. Knowledge of chemistry, access to the cellar, and opportunity to replace the bottles unobserved. Our assassin is no common thief." As he spoke, a troupe of actors crossed the hall, their voices hushed. A violinist, his bow tucked beneath his arm, cast us a glance of mingled curiosity and fear. The very air of the theater seemed thick with suspicion, as though each soul wondered whether the other harbored the fatal secret. Holmes turned to Krauss. "We must speak with your toastmaster. His role is wine." Chapter 3. First Clues Among Velvet Curtains. The following day dawned bleak and heavy with snow, a pallid light filtering through the frosted panes of our lodgings near the theater. Berlin, in the winter months, has little of the cheer that even fog-wreathed London may provide. The streets seemed hard and colorless, the very air biting with iron severity. Yet my companion was already astir at an hour when most men would have remained beneath the covers. I found him bent over a table strewn with fragments of cork, chemical vials, and scraps of paper covered with his crabbed notes. His long fingers manipulated a small lens, and the quick eagerness in his expression told me he had slept little, if at all. "Watson," he said without lifting his gaze, "you perceive these fibers?" I peered through the glass he held. Upon the fragment of cork was visible a thin strand, so faint it might easily have been dismissed as dust. "It appears a fiber, perhaps from cloth," I ventured. "Not cloth," he corrected swiftly. "Velvet, the very nap of stage curtains, if my eye does not deceive me. And found wedged within the puncture of the cork. That, my dear fellow, is our first true link between the bottle and the stage." I marveled. But how could curtain fibers find their way into a wine cellar? Exactly so. It is the contradiction that instructs us. The cork was tampered with not in the cellar but nearer to the stage itself. The assassin carried a bottle into proximity with velvet draperies. A clumsy brush deposited this trace. You perceive? Our phantom has betrayed his lair. As he spoke, Krauss entered, his face drawn with sleepless worry. "Herr Holmes, Dr. Watson, you have been at work already?" "Since dawn," Holmes replied. "We shall now require access to your stage and its recesses. Every curtain, every wing, every trapdoor must be examined. Lead on." The impresario, eager to oblige, conducted us into the great auditorium. Though rehearsal had not yet begun, a few musicians lingered upon the stage, their instruments muttering scales pointed to a disturbance, a partial print, heavy at the heel, overlaid with chalk dust. A man stood here, holding weight, perhaps a bottle, while brushing against the curtain. See how the fibers are disturbed? He lingered, Watson. He did not merely pass. I bent closer. And the shoe, broad at the toe, foreign make perhaps? Holmes's smile flickered. Your medical eye does not fail you. Broad, square-toed, unlike the narrow English last. We must inquire which among the theater company favors such footwear. Krauss wrung his hands. But Mr. Holmes, you cannot suspect my actors. Holmes rose abruptly. My dear sir, I suspect no one. I only observe. The stage has spoken to us in fibers and footprints. It is not yet for us to decide who is guilty, only to note the voice of the inanimate. We pressed on into the wings, where trapdoors gaped and ropes hung like the rigging of some ship. Here Holmes found further traces. A splinter of glass tucked in the seam of a curtain cord, and a faint odor that caused him to wrinkle his nose. Almonds, Watson. You perceive it? I sniffed cautiously. Bitter almonds, prussic acid, cyanide. Precisely. Our poisoner has been careless or perhaps too confident. The scent lingers where he prepared his instruments, most illuminating. At that moment, a voice behind us startled me. A tall man in black, his white cravat gleaming, had stepped from the shadows. He carried himself with solemn dignity, though his eyes darted with suspicion at our scrutiny. Krauss introduced him hurriedly. Herr Vogel, our toastmaster. These gentlemen are here to aid us. The toastmaster inclined his head stiffly. The honor is mine, yet I must protest. What business have strangers behind my curtains? This is sacred ground to the theater. Holmes regarded him with a cool, appraising eye. Sacred ground indeed, especially when death has chosen to tread it. Tell me, Herr Vogel, do you recognize this fragment? He held up the velvet fiber he had. Details shall reveal it. We continued our search of the stage, leaving the offended toastmaster behind. In the dressing rooms, Holmes found further crumbs of significance. A corkscrew of unusual fineness left upon a counter, its point stained faintly as though with residue, and a smudge upon a mirror frame, dark and sticky, which he scraped into a vial for later examination. You see, Watson, he murmured as we returned to the auditorium. The case begins to take form. We have fibers, footprints, scents, instruments. Piece by piece, the mosaic emerges. Yet one element eludes us, the motive. Why these men and not others? Until we grasp the why, the who remains clouded. I reflected aloud. Each was a financier, Krauss told us. Perhaps they wronged someone connected to the theater. An excellent hypothesis. Let us test it. Tonight we shall observe the gala not as guests but as hunters. Keep your eyes open, Watson. The play is about to begin, and we must learn our cues. Evening descended once more upon Berlin. The theater glittered with light as carriages drew up in procession, discharging ladies in silks and gentlemen in uniform. Music floated from the orchestra pit, and laughter echoed in the foyer. Yet beneath the gaiety I discerned a tremor of unease, for death had walked these halls too often of late. Holmes and I stationed ourselves discreetly near the curtain wings, our vantage point affording us a view both of the stage and of the foyer beyond. Krauss bustled nervously among his patrons, while Vogel presided with somber dignity over the array of bottles laid ready for the toast. Holmes's gaze never left the man. Watch him, Watson. He handles the corks as though they were sacred relics. See how he caresses the chain upon which hangs his corkscrew. to the innocent a tool, to the guilty perhaps a weapon. The orchestra swelled, the curtain rose, and the drama began. Yet my attention scarcely followed the performers, for my eyes were fixed upon Holmes, who moved like a shadow among the shadows, his lens glinting as he scrutinized every gesture of the servants and every velvet curtains. And he would not rest until the poisoner was unmasked. Chapter 4. A Toast of Death in the Wine Cellar. The night had passed without further calamity, yet the air about the Grand Theater was thick with unease. The newspapers the following morning carried only a few discreet lines about the recent tragedies, couched in guarded terms, for the authorities wished to suppress panic. Still, whispers circulated in the cafes and boulevards, and Holmes remarked that rumors are more corrosive than truth, for they grow unchecked and feed upon themselves. Herr Kraus greeted us in his office, his eyes red from want of sleep. "Another night survived," he said gravely. "But the terror grows. My patrons will not long endure this dread. I beg you, Mr. Holmes, spare no quarter in your search." Holmes, who had risen that morning with renewed energy, merely inclined his head. "The answer lies beneath our feet, Herr Kraus. It is time we descended to your cellars." The impresario paled. "The wine vaults? But the police have already inspected them with the eye of law, not with the eye of reason," Holmes cut in. "Lead us." We followed him down a winding stair into the bowels of the theater. The air grew damp and chill. The faint drip of water echoed through stone corridors lined with racks upon racks of bottles. The vault stretched vast and labyrinthine, its arches supported by ancient pillars. Lanterns flickered, casting long shadows across the rows of vintages, some dusty with age, others gleaming with recent polish. "It is here," Kraus whispered, "that the toastmaster selects the bottles for our ceremonies. Each is accounted for in the ledger." Holmes seized the heavy tome, flipping through its pages with practiced eye. A catalogue of vintages, yet of little worth if the bottles are tampered with after entry. "What guard is kept here?" "A single cellar master, Herr Stein," Kraus replied. "He has tended this vault 30 years. At a signal, the man was summoned. A stooped figure with hands calloused from long labor, his beard streaked with gray. He bowed to Kraus, then eyed us with curiosity. "Herr Stein, home recently. And note this puncture, once again, a tiny bore through the cork. A hypodermic needle, beyond all doubt." I bent closer. "Same method as we saw before." Holmes nodded. "Our poisoner is consistent. That is his weakness. But mark how few such bottles are found among the thousands here. He does not contaminate at random. He prepares with purpose. The victim is chosen in advance, the bottle set aside for the fatal toast." Kraus shuddered visibly. "Mein Gott, then my cellar is a chamber of death." Holmes pressed the cork fragment into a small envelope. "Not the cellar, Herr Kraus, but the hand that moves within it. Tell me, does any other than Herr Stein and Herr Vogel enter these vaults?" "Never. The key is kept by Vogel. Stein opens the door when summoned. Then we draw closer to our quarry." At that moment, Holmes paused beside a rack of older vintages. He drew out a bottle and held it under the lantern. Its cork bore not only the telltale puncture, but also a faint dark stain along the rim. He sniffed it, his nostrils flaring. "Prussic acid again, Watson," he murmured. "Do you perceive? A careless drop upon the rim. This is a prepared weapon, awaiting only its hour." I recoiled, for the very thought that so deadly a draught slumbered unsuspected among the wines chilled me to the marrow. Holmes replaced the bottle gently, then turned to Stein. "When Vogel chooses a wine, do you observe him closely?" The old man shrugged. I hand him the lantern and remain at his side. He selects. I record. And yet a moment's distraction would suffice. A servant enters. You turn your head, and the cork is pierced. The act takes but seconds. Stein's weathered face tightened with unease. I never thought. Holmes laid a hand on his shoulder. No blame attaches to you. The craft is subtle. But from this moment onward, no bottle must leave this vault without my inspection. Do you understand? The cellar master nodded gravely. We spent the next hour in exhaustive search. Holmes examined trapdoors, vents, even the mortar between stones. He found no secret passage, yet he noted the vault's isolation, an ideal. What possible motive could Vogel harbor? He has been loyal beyond reproach. My father knew him before me. Holmes shrugged. Motives are many. Revenge, envy, politics. We must dig deeper into Vogel's past. But first we must spring the trap. Tonight, Herr Kraus, you will allow me to choose the bottle for the toast. It shall be our bait. The impresario's eyes widened. You mean... I mean, Holmes said firmly, that the hunter shall find his own wine turned against him. We left the cellar, the weight of its secrets pressing upon us. The chill of its stones seemed to cling to my very bones. As we emerged into the brighter corridors above, I felt the relief of one who has ascended from a tomb. That evening, the theater was again ablaze with light. The opera was to be performed before a distinguished audience, and the foyer bustled with anticipation. Holmes, however, slipped unseen into the cellar hours beforehand, carrying with him a small valise of instruments. He allowed me to accompany him, though he bade me speak not a word. There, by lantern light, I watched him withdraw a bottle of claret, test the cork with delicate probes, and seal it again with his own hand. Into the cork he inserted a fine thread, so arranged that the slightest prick of a needle would dislodge a tiny pellet hidden within. A trap, Watson, he whispered. If our assassin attempts his usual method, this pellet will fall into the wine, coloring it unmistakably. Then, when the glasses are raised, I shall halt the toast, and the guilty hand shall be revealed. The audacity of the plan left me both awed and fearful. But Holmes, suppose he suspects, suppose he strikes at you. Holmes's thin smile did not falter. Then at least we shall know the hand that strikes. We carried the bottle ourselves to the foyer, placing it among the array of vintages. Vogel approached, solemn as ever, and his eyes rested upon the chosen wine. For a moment I fancied a flicker of hesitation crossed his face. Then he nodded gravely and prepared his ceremony. Chapter 5. The Berlin Connection. The morning after our descent into the cellar, I awoke to find Holmes already at work. The embers of the previous night's fire had died to gray ash, yet he sat cross-legged upon the hearthrug, his dressing gown drawn close about his wiry frame, with a spread of papers before him. He looked up as I entered, his keen eyes glittering with that peculiar light which told me that his mind had already traveled far beyond our modest lodgings. Watson, said he, the theater has yielded its first confession, not in words but in patterns. Observe these accounts. I drew closer and saw that he had obtained several ledgers, evidently borrowed from Herr Kraus. They were densely covered with German script, columns of numbers and names, notations of expenses, payments, and receipts. You perceive, Holmes continued, that each of the gentlemen who perished, Baron Kruger, Herr Dietrich, and Count Wexler, was not merely a patron, but a financier of the theater. Each had advanced considerable sums, expecting profits in return. Here, here, and here. He tapped the ledger with his long finger. But note the irregularities. Payments deferred, interest accumulated, disputes unresolved. What do you conclude? That each of the victims had a quarrel with the theater, I suggested cautiously. Just so. And whom do they encounter most directly when their purses are engaged? Not Krauss, who is an artist, nor the musicians, nor the actors, but Vogel, the toastmaster, the guardian of ritual, the man who officiates over both wine and contract alike. He is more than a servant. He is a symbol, the face of the theater's dignity. When the financiers grow impatient, Vogel bears their scorn. Then you believe these deaths are revenge for financial wrongs. Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. Not quite. Revenge alone seldom weaves such an elaborate skein. No, Watson, there is more beneath. Consider this. Why poison by way of toast, in a public hall, under 100 eyes? Why not among men in cafes? Our first call was upon Inspector Adler of the Berlin police, a square-jawed man with clipped mustache, who had crossed Holmes's path once before in a matter of espionage. Adler received us cordially in his office near Alexanderplatz, though his manner suggested skepticism. "So, Herr Holmes," said he, "you believe our humble toastmaster to be a poisoner? I find it difficult. He is a relic, an old soldier of the stage. And yet I cannot deny that your reputation for detection is formidable." Holmes accepted the compliment with a slight bow. "I do not yet assert Vogel's guilt. I only observe the line of probability. But tell me, Inspector, what is known of his past?" Adler consulted a file. Born in Saxony. Served briefly in the Prussian Guard, dismissed for insubordination. Came to Berlin 25 years ago. Took employment at the theater, and has remained ever since. No crimes recorded. Any political associations? Holmes pressed. Adler hesitated. There are rumors of his sympathy with certain nationalist societies, but nothing proven. He is discreet. Holmes's eyes gleamed. And discreet men are the most dangerous. I thank you, Inspector. That suffices for now. As we departed, I remarked, "Holmes, you press heavily upon this poor fellow's past. Yet what if he is innocent? Then he will survive my scrutiny." Holmes replied calmly, "The innocent man is a fortress, the guilty man a house of cards. A breath will topple him." Our next errand took us to a small cafe near the theater, frequented by actors, stagehands, and critics. Holmes settled into a corner seat, his pipe sending up its familiar haze, while I translated the gossip of those around us. One stagehand, loosened by beer, spoke with bitterness. "The financiers, they bleed us dry, always demanding profit, never caring for art." I heard Vogel himself curse them, swear they were parasites, yet he alone could never act against them. He is too proud, too bound to ritual. "Krauss tells me," he said stiffly, "that you gentlemen wish to observe my humble duty. I confess I find this scrutiny offensive. Have I not served faithfully?" Holmes's reply was gentle, almost courteous. "Indeed you have, Herr Vogel, and it is precisely your faithfulness which interests me. For faith may hide much, resentment perhaps, or a desire for retribution." Vogel's eyes flashed. "You speak in riddles." Then let us speak plainly. Holmes indicated a bottle set upon the crate. Here is a vintage chosen for tonight's toast. I invite you to uncork it as you would before an audience. The toastmaster's hand trembled, though slightly. He withdrew his corkscrew from its chain with solemn ceremony. As he poised it above the cork, Holmes's voice rang out sharply. "One moment. Watson, observe the thread." I bent forward. A tiny thread, almost invisible, protruded from the cork. Vogel started, his face paling. The corkscrew wavered. Holmes's voice grew cold. "Had you driven your screw into the cork, Herr Vogel, a pellet would have dropped, discoloring the wine. A harmless stratagem of mine, yet it would have proved your method beyond question. And see, your hand betrayed you. You knew at once the meaning of that thread. An innocent man would not." For a heartbeat, silence reigned in the cellar. Then Vogel drew himself up, his eyes blazing with dignity. "You dare to ensnare me with tricks? I am no murderer. I serve the theater, not death. If financiers fall, it is because they choke upon their own greed." Holmes stepped closer, his gaze relentless. "And yet only when you pour their wine does fate strike. Explain that, Herr Vogel." The toastmaster's lips moved, but no words emerged. His hand clenched upon the corkscrew as though it were a dagger. I feared for Holmes's safety, but my friend did not flinch. Finally, Vogel dropped the tool with a clatter. He sank upon a crate, his face in shadow. "You do not understand," he muttered hoarsely. "The theater must be protected. Theater. But the politics of Berlin itself. That is the connection we must unearth." He drew upon his pipe, the smoke curling like thought itself. "Yes, the Berlin connection. And when we grasp that thread, the whole tapestry shall unravel." Chapter 6. Shadows of Conspiracy. The days that followed our confrontation in the cellar seemed to gather shadows about them. A pall hung over the Grand Theater, though the gaslights blazed with undiminished splendor and the velvet curtains fell each night upon triumphant performances. Whispers of death, however, had a way of seeping through marble walls and gilded moldings. They rode in the hush of the audience, in the anxious glances of patrons, and in the nervous tremor of the actors' voices. Holmes, far from disheartened, seemed only more animated. He had scented a wider quarry, and now prowled through the city like a hound upon the faintest trace. He haunted archives, interviewed clerks, lingered in cafes thick with smoke and politics. I accompanied him faithfully, though often bewildered by the rapidity of his shifts, for his mind leapt from thread to thread as though weaving an invisible net whose pattern only he discerned. On the third morning, as we returned from a fruitless errand in the Ministry of Finance, Holmes flung himself into a chair in our lodging, steepled his fingers, and uttered one of those abrupt exclamations that signal the turning of his thought. "Watson," he said, "have you observed how each victim was not merely a financier but a political instrument?" I frowned. Political? I thought them mere investors. Ah, but investors in art are seldom disinterested. Baron Kruger, ally of the Prussian conservatives, Herr Dietrich, linked to the liberal press, Count Wexler, rumored patron of nationalist societies. Each held a stake not only in the theater's coffers but in its influence. A stage in Berlin is no trifling bauble, Watson. It is a pulpit, a battlefield, a banner. Through it, ideas march clothed in music and drama, and those who control the purse control the message. You mean then that Vogel's crimes served not revenge alone but politics? Holmes's eye suspicion. We had gone once more to the theater, ostensibly as ordinary spectators. The house was packed, the tiers glittering with jewels and uniforms. The air was rich with perfume, tobacco, and anticipation. At the close of the second act, as the audience drifted into the foyer, Holmes drew me aside to a vantage point behind a column. From there we observed Vogel as he performed his familiar ritual. Yet Holmes's gaze was not upon the man's hands, but upon those who hovered near him. "Mock that figure, Watson," he murmured. A tall gentleman stood among the crowd, elegant in bearing, his uniform adorned with the insignia of a Prussian colonel. He spoke quietly with Vogel, who inclined his head with the deference of a servant to a master. The colonel's hand rested for a moment upon Vogel's arm. A fleeting gesture, yet it carried an air of command unmistakable. "Colonel von Bismarck-Hallwitz," Holmes whispered. "A soldier of influence, known for his nationalist sympathies. He is no stranger to the Reichstag's intrigues. See how Vogel bends to him. There, Watson, is our shadow." I felt a thrill of apprehension. "But Holmes, if you are right, then we tread among dangerous men. This is no mere crime of passion. It is conspiracy of state." "Quite so," he answered coolly. "And that, my dear friend, makes the chase the more exhilarating." The next morning we set about gathering intelligence upon Colonel von Bismarck-Hallwitz. Holmes sent discreet inquiries through Adler, the police inspector, and also plied his own informal network of informants. Within a day he had amassed a portrait of the man. Ambitious, fiercely patriotic, and a patron of societies that preached unity through art and ritual. Holmes laid the papers before me as though presenting evidence to a jury. "Observe, he attends every gala. He maintains correspondence with half the city's financiers. He has spoken openly of purging unworthy elements from the cultural He seemed to weigh them, then replaced one and drew forth the other." Holmes stepped forward. "Permit me, Herr Vogel." The toastmaster started, his face pale. Holmes took the bottle from his hand and examined the cork. His lips curved in a thin smile. "As I suspected," he said softly. "See, Watson, another puncture. The bottle is prepared. And whom was it meant to serve? That is the question." At that instant, the sound of boots upon stone heralded another arrival. Colonel von Bismarck-Hallwitz himself entered the vault, his presence commanding, his eyes cold. "What is this?" he demanded sharply. "Why do you interfere with the toastmaster's duties?" Holmes faced him with unflinching calm. "Because those duties have become instruments of murder. This bottle, Colonel, bears the mark of poison." The colonel's expression did not change, save for a flicker of disdain. "You make dangerous accusations, Herr Holmes. Take care that you do not slander loyal servants of the fatherland." Holmes's eyes blazed. "When loyalty cloaks murder, Colonel, it is loyalty to death, not to country. And I shall prove it before this night is out." The colonel drew himself up, every inch the soldier. "You are an Englishman upon German soil. Remember your place." With that, he turned upon his heel and strode away, Vogel following in his wake like a chastened hound. When they had gone, I found my voice. "Holmes, you risk much. These are men of influence. To oppose them is perilous." Holmes's reply was curt, almost fierce. Watson, truth is always perilous, but the evidence mounts. Vogel is the hand, Hollowitz is the brain. The poison flows not from cellar to stage alone, but from power to theater, from politics to art. They would make the theater a weapon, striking down those who resist their design. We must act swiftly, or the next toast may fell not a financier, but a statesman. He paced the vault, his face set with determination. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall confront Adler with secret agenda. The following morning, Berlin awoke beneath a leaden sky, the air heavy with impending snow. Our lodgings near the theater seemed colder than ever, for though the stove burned red, the weight of conspiracy pressed down upon us. Holmes, however, was at his most energetic. He sat at the table with papers strewn before him, his long fingers drumming impatiently. His pipe sent up curling smoke, wreathing his hawk-like profile in mist. "Watson," he said abruptly, "the pattern is nearly complete. The Colonel hides behind Vogel as a dramatist hides behind his actors. But every dramatist leaves a manuscript, and it is that manuscript we must discover." "You mean written evidence?" I asked. "Precisely. A man like Hollowitz does not conspire without correspondence, notes, receipts. He must keep lists, even if hidden. Such men cannot resist the vanity of their designs. Somewhere in Berlin, Watson, lies the script of his treachery, and we must find it before the curtain falls upon another victim." Our first call that day was upon Inspector Adler. The police office smelled of damp wool and ink, and the inspector looked up wearily as we entered. Holmes wasted no time. "Adler," he said, "you must set aside diplomacy. Colonel von Bismarck Hollowitz is orchestrating these murders through his agent Vogel." Adler frowned deeply. "Holmes, you tread upon dangerous ground. The Colonel is of high standing. To accuse him without proof would be folly. The Kaiser himself has spoken well of him." Holmes's eyes glittered. "And yet 3 financiers lie in their graves. Do you think their deaths mere accidents? Here." He laid out the punctured corks and fragments of evidence. "And here, ledgers showing payments funneling through the Colonel's regiment. What more do you require?" Adler leaned back, troubled. "I cannot move against him yet. But if you bring me irrefutable proof, letters, a witness, a confession, I will act. Until then, I must remain blind." Holmes gathered his papers sharply. "Very well." "Cafe?" I did. The fellow named Schultz, who had spoken bitterly of financiers. Holmes nodded. He boasted of Vogel's curses against the dead men. Such loyalty is telling. I wager he is also in Vogel's confidence. If so, he may serve as a stepping stone to the Colonel. Let us pay him a call. We found Schultz in a smoky tavern near the river, his broad hands wrapped around a tankard of beer. At first he was suspicious, but Holmes's manner soon disarmed him. He spoke with rough candor once his tongue was loosened by drink. "Yeah, I know Vogel," he admitted. "He is no ordinary toastmaster. He speaks of Germany, of purity, of cleansing corruption. He says the theater must serve the fatherland. And sometimes," Schultz lowered his voice, "he goes to meet the Colonel, late at night. I have seen them walking together near the Tiergarten." Holmes leaned forward. "And what do they discuss?" Schultz shrugged. "I do not know. But I once carried a parcel from Vogel to the Colonel's villa. A heavy box, sealed. I was told it contained wine, but the weight, ugh, it felt like ledgers, books, papers. Holmes's eyes gleamed. A parcel of records, the very manuscript we seek. We pressed Schultz further, and at last he revealed that Vogel kept a small study adjoining his chamber in the theater itself. There, said he, the toastmaster stored his private correspondence. Holmes rose abruptly, his decision made. Tonight, Watson, we visit Vogel's study. If he holds letters from the colonel, they will be there. The theater lay silent after midnight, its great auditorium dark, the stage a cavern of shadows. With Krause's tacit permission, we entered by a side door, our lanterns dimmed. Holmes moved swiftly, noiselessly, guiding me through narrow passages until we reached a small door behind the dressing rooms. "This is it," he whispered. The lock yielded to his deft fingers in moments. Within we found a cramped chamber lined with shelves. Papers lay in neat stacks upon the desk, and above them hung a portrait of the colonel himself. Holmes gave a low whistle. That instant, a sound froze us. The creak of a floorboard outside. Holmes snuffed the lantern. We crouched in darkness, scarcely daring to breathe. Footsteps approached. The key rattled in the lock. The door swung open, and a shaft of light fell across the study. Vogel himself entered, his gaunt face weary, a candle in his hand. He started violently as he beheld us. "You," he hissed. "Thieves, traitors, what are you doing here?" Holmes straightened, the incriminating letters in his grasp. "Seeking truth, Herr Vogel, and we have found it. Your colonel commands, you obey. Murder flows from pen to cork. It ends tonight." Vogel's face contorted with rage. "Give me those letters!" He lunged, but Holmes stepped aside, swift as a fencer. I seized Vogel's arm, struggling to restrain him. The candle toppled, sputtering dangerously near the papers. Holmes's voice rang out. "Watson, the door, quickly!" Together we forced Vogel back, slammed the door, and fled into the passage. His furious cries echoed behind us as we raced through the theater's labyrinth. Only when we reached the frosty night air did we breathe freely again. Holmes clutched the letters to his breast, his eyes shining. "We have it, Watson. Proof undeniable, damning beyond denial. The colonel's secret agenda is ours. Now we shall see whether Adler has the courage to strike." The next morning we laid the letters before Inspector Adler. He read them in silence, his face grim. At last he raised his eyes. "This is indeed decisive. The colonel has overreached. I will place this before the Chancellor himself. Vogel will be arrested at once. As for Holwitz, he is powerful, but with these letters even his star must dim." Holmes inclined his head. "Strike swiftly, Inspector. For conspiracies are like serpents, cut one head, dignitaries, one toast, and half the diplomatic corps could be laid low in an instant." The chill in his words made me set down my teacup. "You mean he will strike again tonight?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The proof we hold condemns him. Adler prepares the warrant even now. But Holwitz is no fool. He must sense the net closing. And like any desperate man, he may lash out with deadly force before it tightens." I shivered, recalling the venom in the colonel's gaze when Holmes had confronted him in the wine cellar. The notion of such a man wielding poison at a gala where monarchs and statesmen drank freely filled me with dread. That afternoon we met with Inspector Adler. The letters Holmes had recovered lay upon his desk, now sealed and stamped. He looked grave, his eyes shadowed by responsibility. "The Chancellor has read these documents," Adler told us. "He consents that the colonel be placed under arrest. But it must be done discreetly, for scandal would wound the government deeply. We have chosen the gala as the moment. The colonel will be present, and officers will be ready. Yet," he hesitated. "Yet what?" Holmes demanded. "Vogel," Adler said grimly. "He remains at large. If he acts before we seize the colonel, catastrophe may ensue. I can spare men to watch him, but the theater is vast. Gentlemen, I must ask for your assistance. Keep watch upon Vogel. If he stirs with bottle or glass, stay his hand." Holmes bowed curtly. "Inspector, you may count on us. But know this, Vogel is no longer the prime mover. He is but the instrument. Strike swiftly at Holwitz, or your gala may be a funeral." Evening descended, cloaking Berlin in fog and snow. The theater blazed like a jewel, its windows spilling golden light into the frozen square. Carriages rattled up in quick succession. Liveried footmen opened doors for glittering ladies and stiff-backed officers. Inside, chandeliers shed their radiance upon marble halls, and the air was thick with perfume and anticipation. Holmes and I, dressed in sober evening attire, mingled among the throng. Yet beneath the glitter, a close. The familiar ritual began. The toast to patrons and benefactors. Vogel descended into the cellar with solemn tread. Holmes caught my sleeve. "Come, this is the moment." We followed at a distance, careful not to draw notice. In the dim vault, Vogel paused before the racks, his hand trembling over the bottles. For a moment he seemed paralyzed, torn between obedience and terror. Then, with sudden resolve, he seized a bottle, uncorked it with deft precision, and drew forth a tiny vial from his pocket. Holmes stepped forward. "No further, Vogel." The toastmaster started, dropping the vial, which shattered upon the stone. The acrid stench of poison filled the air. Holmes caught the bottle from his hand, thrusting it back into the rack. "Your game is over," Holmes said coldly. "We have your master's letters. Tonight the law closes upon him." Vogel's face twisted, not with fear, but with fanatic devotion. "You do not understand, Englishman. He is the savior of Germany. To cleanse, to purify." Holmes's grip tightened on his arm. "He is a murderer, and you are his accomplice. Come." But even as we prepared to escort him upward, Vogel wrenched free with surprising strength and dashed up the stair, his wild cry echoing through the vault. "Colonel! Colonel!" Chaos erupted above. The orchestra faltered, guests murmured, and officers sprang to their feet. In the center of the hall, Vogel fell upon his knees before Holwitz, pointing at us with accusing hand. "They know, Herr Oberst. They have the letters. They betray us." For a moment all was still. Then Holwitz's face hardened like steel. He reached beneath his cloak, and in one swift motion produced a pistol. Gasps and shrieks rang through the theater as he leveled it at Holmes. I threw myself sideways, knocking Holmes to the ground just as the weapon discharged. The shot thundered through the hall, shattering a chandelier's crystal arm. Pandemonium followed. Ladies screamed, gentlemen shouted, officers surged forward. Adler's men rushed patriotism and purity. Vogel, raving like a zealot, was carried struggling to a carriage. The guests, pale and shaken, departed in hushed groups, their jewels and uniforms dulled by fear. Holmes and I returned at last to our lodgings, the night still echoing in my ears. My shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed me, but Holmes bound it with quick precision. "You were lucky, Watson," he said quietly. "Half an inch deeper, and I should have had to carry your epitaph to London." I smiled weakly. "And you, Holmes? You would have been the Colonel's victim had I not pushed you aside." He regarded me gravely. "Then once again, my dear friend, I am in your debt." He sank into his chair, the smoke of his pipe rising like the residue of battle. His voice grew reflective. "Mark it, Watson. Fanaticism is ever the same, whether cloaked in politics, art, or faith. It begins with noble phrases and ends with blood upon the floor. Tonight the stage of Berlin witnessed not drama, but the naked truth. That power, once poisoned by ambition, will stop at nothing." The next day Berlin buzzed with rumor. Papers spoke of a disturbance at the theater, though the true cause was whispered only in private circles. Holowitz's arrest was kept discreet, but his name was already shadowed. Vogel, it was said, had collapsed into silence, his fervor spent. Holmes, however, showed no triumph. He sat long at the window, watching the fog roll over the Tier Garden. "The play is not over, Watson," he said softly. "We have struck down the chief conspirator, but others remain. Holowitz was but one voice in a chorus, Vogel but one instrument. There will be more, in Berlin, in London. Everywhere men seek to purify by destruction. We have bought time, not peace." I felt a chill despite the fire. Yet in Holmes's eyes burned that indomitable light, the certainty that truth, however perilous, must always be pursued. And thus, though our work is unfinished. The gala was but the climax. Now comes the trial, the true stage where guilt must be spoken, weighed, and judged. There lies the danger, for conspirators seldom yield quietly when the scaffold beckons. The Colonel may yet seek escape, or his allies may stir to rescue him. We must remain vigilant until the curtain falls completely. I had long known Holmes's instinct for unfinished danger, and I did not doubt him now. That afternoon we attended Inspector Adler at the Ministry of Justice, where both Vogel and Colonel von Bismarck-Holowitz were confined. They were held separately, guarded by armed officers. We were first admitted to Vogel's cell. The toastmaster sat upon a wooden bench, his gaunt form stooped, his eyes burning with fanatical fire. He sprang to his feet as we entered, chains clinking at his wrists. "Traitors!" he spat. "Do you think chains silence truth? You may bind me, but the cause is eternal. The fatherland will be purified. Holowitz is the sword of destiny." Holmes regarded him coolly. "A sword that lies broken in its scabbard. You are no prophet, Vogel, but a murderer of innocence, a servant of ambition." Vogel laughed, a wild, mirthless sound. "You English cannot understand. You live in comfort while Germany bleeds. We must cleanse, we must purge. The theater is our altar, the wine our sacrament. You—" His words dissolved into incoherent mutterings. Adler motioned us away. "He is hopeless," the inspector muttered. "Mad with zeal, But the colonel, that is another matter. Come. We entered Holowitz's chamber. The colonel stood erect, arms folded, his uniform stripped of insignia, yet his bearing undiminished. He greeted us with cold disdain. "Ah, the English meddler," he said, fixing Holmes with piercing eyes. "You have ruined a patriot's work. For what? To please foreign masters. You think you have triumphed. But nations are not toppled by letters and courts." Holmes's reply was sharp, and I were summoned as witnesses. Our presence greeted with murmurs. I confess my heart beat fast as I took my seat, for I felt the eyes of all Berlin upon us. Adler opened with deliberate gravity. He recounted the deaths of Kruger, Dietrich, and Wexler, the punctured corks, the tainted wine. He called witnesses from the theater staff who spoke of Vogel's duties, his fervent speeches, his late-night meetings with the colonel. Then came the letters, the damning bundle Holmes had seized from Vogel's study. Read aloud, their words echoed like thunder. "Cleanse the theater of parasites. Pour the draught of judgment. Our holy duty." Gasps rose from the audience. The judges leaned forward with darkened brows. The colonel's advocate protested that the letters were fabrications, but Adler produced the colonel's own secretary, who swore to the handwriting, the seal, the dates. Finally, Holmes was summoned. He rose with calm precision, his voice steady, his reasoning a chain of logic wrought iron strong. He described the investigation, the punctures in the corks, the substitution of bottles, the confrontation in the vault. His every sentence struck like a hammer, forging evidence into proof. When at last he sat, the chamber buzzed with subdued awe. Then came the defense. The colonel himself rose, disdain radiating from him. "I deny these charges," he declared in ringing tones. "Yes, I spoke of cleansing. Yes, I urged the theater to serve Germany. But words are not deeds. I never commanded poison. If Vogel acted, he acted alone, misinterpreting my zeal. Shall a patriot be condemned for rhetoric? Shall the fatherland be shamed because enemies twist a soldier's words?" A murmur ran through the hall. He had spoken boldly, appealing to pride and patriotism. His presence was commanding still, though his cause was stained. Vogel, too, was permitted to speak. He raved of destiny, of blood, of purification. His words, far from aiding the defense, only deepened. At last, the chamber hushed as the presiding judge delivered the verdict. "Vogel, you are guilty of murder, of attempted murder, of conspiracy. You shall face the ultimate penalty of the law. Colonel von Bismarck-Holowitz, you are guilty of instigation, of conspiracy, of endangering the state. Your rank cannot shield you. You shall be stripped of honors and sentenced to imprisonment for life." The words fell like stones. Vogel shrieked and collapsed in chains, his fanatic fire extinguished in despair. The colonel stood rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with impotent fury. Holmes leaned toward me, whispering, "The play has reached its denouement, Watson." That evening, as we walked back through the snow-clad streets, Berlin seemed strangely hushed. The lights glowed dimly, the carriages rolled slower, as though the city itself was weary. Holmes spoke little, his mind turned inward. At last he said, "Watson, Justice has been done, but not peace. For every Hollowitz unmasked, there are others cloaked in patriotism, ambition, or faith. It is ever the same drama, repeated on new stages. And yet, I said, you have saved many lives, Holmes. Surely that is triumph enough. He smiled faintly. Perhaps, but I am reminded of the theater's own art. One may silence the villain in the final act. Yet beyond the curtain, new villains wait in the wings. Our task, my dear fellow, is never truly ended. I could not but agree. The shadows had lifted from the Grand Theater, but new shadows lay always beyond, waiting for Holmes's keen eye to pierce them. And thus, though Berlin slept that night beneath its snow, I knew my friend's mind already sought the next case, the next mystery, the next struggle against the hidden hand of darkness. Chapter 10. Holmes's Final Deduction. The great trial of Colonel von Bismarck Hollowitz. Justice, perhaps, but comprehension? That is another matter. You are still troubled by the sequence, the why as much as the how. Your medical mind cannot rest until the anatomy of the case is fully laid bare. I laughed ruefully. You read me, Holmes, as ever. Indeed, the affair still lies in fragments before me. I understand portions, the poisoned corks, the fanatic's zeal, but not the whole design. Will you not, as is your custom, gather the threads together and show me the tapestry entire? Holmes's thin lips curved into a faint smile. Gladly, Watson. For myself, the play is not over until the curtain call. Let us then reconstruct the drama of the poisoned wine of the Berlin Grand Theater. Holmes sat forward, his voice taking on the measured cadence of the lecturer. First, consider the victims. Baron Kruger, Herr Dietrich, Count Wexler. At first glance, wealthy patrons of the arts, nothing more. Yet each represented a faction in Berlin's politics, conservative, liberal, nationalist. Their deaths, far from random, struck symbolic blows across the spectrum. This was not vengeance against individuals, but a campaign against influences deemed corrupt or un-German. Second, the instrument, wine. A toast is a moment of trust, of communal exaltation. To pervert it with poison was no mere convenience, it was theater within theater, a ritual-turned weapon. Vogel, obsessed with symbolism, found in this act a sacrament of purification. Third, the agent, Vogel himself. Once a simple toastmaster, embittered by obscurity, he was seduced by grandiose visions. He saw himself as priest of a cultural cleansing. But he lacked the means or daring to act alone. He required a patron. Holmes's hand flicked a gesture toward the window as though pointing to the prison beyond. And so enters Colonel von Bismarck Hollowitz, an ambitious nationalist, impatient with diplomacy, eager to bend art to his cause. He found in Vogel a willing zealot, might have faltered. With them, the conspiracy stood revealed in ink and seal. Holmes grew grave as he recalled the climax. At the gala, the colonel, sensing the walls close in, sought one final, desperate stroke. He armed Vogel with poison, enough to lay low a company of dignitaries. Had we not intervened, Watson, The toast that night might have altered Europe's balance. Imagine it. Envoys dead, princes stricken, a nation convulsed in outrage. In the chaos, Halwitz would have painted himself prophet, savior, avenger. But fortune, or rather observation, favored us. We intercepted Vogel. The vial was spilled, and the colonel unmasked himself with pistol in hand. Thus the theater, which he sought to turn into an altar of death, became instead his stage of disgrace. For a time Holmes was silent, the firelight flickering upon his sharp features. When he spoke again it was softer, touched with that rare melancholy which sometimes stole upon him after victory. "Watson, what strikes me most is not the poison, nor even the conspiracy, but the stage itself. Consider, art, which should ennoble, was here perverted into a weapon. The theater, meant to elevate, was turned into a snare. And men, Kruger, Dietrich, Wexler, perished not for what they did, but for what they represented. They were symbols slain for symbols. That is the true tragedy." I nodded gravely. "You speak of fanaticism." "Precisely. Fanaticism is the poison more subtle than strychnine, more corrosive than cyanide. Once imbibed, it warps reason, blinds conscience, sanctifies murder. Vogel was a poor fool, consumed by it. Halwitz, more dangerous still, sought to harness it for power. And yet in the end both fell victim to the same delusion, that death can cleanse, that destruction can purify. A falsehood as old as history, and as enduring." He drew a long breath. Thanks to Holmes's brilliance, with lives saved and justice secured. Holmes sat opposite me, his profile etched against the window, his eyes already distant, as though scanning horizons invisible to me. "Holmes," I said softly, "you have once again plucked truth from the heart of darkness. Do you not feel some pride?" He gave a small shrug. "Pride, Watson, is but vanity in finer garb. I feel only that the play has ended, the curtain fallen, the stage empty, until, of course, the next performance begins." And with that he lapsed into silence, the rhythmic clatter of the train carrying us homeward, back to London, back to Baker Street, and to whatever mystery awaited us beyond the fog of the future. Later, as I set pen to paper to record the affair, I reflected upon Holmes's words. The poisoned wine of the Berlin Grand Theatre was not merely a tale of corks and bottles, of plots and pistols. It was a parable of human folly, the folly of those who mistake destruction for salvation, and who dress murder in the robes of patriotism. Holmes had unmasked them, as he ever unmasked deceit. Yet even he could not banish the truth he had spoken, that shadows return, and that men will ever raise altars of blood in the name of ideas. Still, I hold that as long as there are minds like Holmes's, clear, unyielding, dedicated to reason, there is hope. Hope that the poison may be checked, the cork unpierced, the toast preserved for fellowship rather than death. And so I close this chronicle with gratitude. Gratitude for my friend, for justice done, and for the lesson that even in the darkest of conspiracies, light may yet prevail.